Good morning. This morning I've spent some of my time working on plans for a memorial service for a good friend of mine who passed away in the past week. And as I've spent time thinking about that, thinking about her, I've also had reason to think about and talk to some family members today. And the thing that hits me as a pastor that I thought might be a good thing to share this morning is a reminder. And many of us know this, but still often we need to be reminded that when it comes to death, when it comes to the loss of a loved one, grieving is something we all do. But most of us do it very differently, and somehow or another, a lot of times we assume that everyone is going to grieve the same way we do. And when we make those assumptions, it makes that process even more difficult, particularly for families who may not understand why another person isn't grieving the way they do. So I wanted to address that a little bit today. People may grieve differently because of their personalities. They may grieve differently because they're in what we call different stages of grieving. And I'm not going to get into all the different stages today, but just some general ways that people deal differently with death. It may be that we may have anger, guilt, loneliness, sadness, or a yearning to have that person back with us. And I want to suggest that all of those are okay. Now, you don't want to, like they talk about with stages of grief, you don't want to get stuck in one necessarily, but I think it's a good thing to come to terms to figure out where you are in that process of grieving. And the Bible actually has something to say that I think relates to several of those different things. And one of the things that I think we think about the most, Psalm talks a lot, so a lot of these scriptures come from Psalms. But as Christians, we can truly have strength from our relationship with God in any difficult times. But in Psalm chapter 18, verse 2, it refers to God being our rock, our fortress, and our deliverer. So in the midst of the struggles, in the midst of losing someone, that's a time, a place that we can rely on God and have strength. And I've known people that I see that in the midst of the loss of a loved one. But at the same time, I don't know that we are not likely going to feel that the entire time throughout that grieving process. And some people, that's just not where they are for a very long time. So there are other things too. People will weep and cry a lot sometimes, and that's okay. It's a way of expressing emotion that God's given us. In fact, even in the Bible, in John chapter 11, verse 35, it's, I think some people have told me, the shortest verse in the Bible, but that short verse is very powerful. It's 2 words: Jesus wept. If Jesus wept, and it was something that he used to release emotion, don't we think that's important for us to be able to have the freedom to do that as well? And then there's another one. A lot of times when people have lost someone, that they struggle being around lots of people, so there can be a sense of withdrawal. And you have to be careful. You don't want to withdraw from society. You don't want to withdraw from everybody for a long period of time, but there can be value in that. And so there's a scripture in Psalm chapter 46, verse 10. It says, "Be still and know I am God." So in the midst of that withdrawing, in fact, I talked to a gentleman today, and he said there's times he just needed to be to himself. And I think that can be very appropriate, particularly when we allow that to be a time for us and God together. And then the last one I want to share is brokenness. I think a lot of times we're broken, and some people say that, or think that if we're feeling broken or we're not dealing with it in a way that's helping us to get past it quickly or something like that, it makes us less of a Christian, and that's just not true. But I think something we can hold on to, and we know that God recognizes that, because in Psalm chapter 147, verse 3, it says, He heals the brokenhearted. God does bring healing to us. And one of the illustrations I've heard before, I'm not sure where, when God brings healing to us, very rarely does He restore us back to the same place we were before we were broken. And that's a good thing. The way I think about it is in terms of a tapestry or in terms of a patchwork quilt. You have all the individual pieces, and it's like when you're broken and all these parts of your life fall apart, but then they get put back together. Somehow or another, there's beauty in the way the pieces come together, and a reminder of what we learned through that brokenheartedness, a reminder of the strength, a reminder of the hope, a reminder of the peace of the God who helps to put that back together. And sometimes that can happen relatively quickly, sometimes it happens over time. But I just want to assure you, and don't know how many of you are going through anything like that right now, but if you're not, there probably will come a time that you will. But just remember, for yourself, for your family, as we grieve differently. And no matter how you may be grieving, God is in the midst of that grief with you. And be sure to acknowledge that, and God will bring you strength, peace, and hope in His time, in the way that will meet your need. So have a blessed day. I look forward to seeing you soon.